greater reality. In the early 20th century, while working by day as a patent clerk, the physicist Albert Einstein began developing a theory which would eventually convince the academic world that space and time are not fundamental features of reality, as had long been assumed, but are in fact generated out of a deeper, underlying order. The universe is not simply a place or a container in which things happen. It is rather a developing system. During the same period, the emerging field of quantum mechanics went on to describe a deeply interconnected reality, within which no single part could be truly abstracted from the whole, and in which every particle is potentially interconnected with every other particle in the universe. Through Einstein's discovery that light travels at an astonishing, though finite speed, we realized that our most distant observations reveal the universe at its most ancient. The light from distant galaxies captured them as they had existed when the light was first emitted, billions of years ago. As we gazed out into the vast cosmos, we realized that we are in fact also gazing through time. Both Einstein's relativity and the emerging physics of the quantum came as a surprise to then senior physicists of the early 20th century, many of whom believed that physics was approaching completion as an exhaustive description of nature. And yet, coming discoveries of the next 100 years would begin to intimate a much deeper and more mysterious reality. For the early scientific forerunners, such as Kepler and Newton, the Earth, Sun, Moon, and planets comprised the entire universe. Few took seriously the possibility that the stars, those mysterious points of light moving together across the night sky, could in fact be other suns. The most sophisticated cosmology was primarily concerned with modelling the predictable movements of the observable celestial bodies. Theories were demonstrated through the literal use of clockwork models, with pirouetting planets encircling first a central Earth, and then later amended to a central Sun. Earlier models of the universe were attempts to grasp an apparently timeless reality, in which the celestial bodies moved eternally and unchanging. Today, however, cosmologists understand themselves as inhabiting a very different universe, a universe which has undergone a long developmental evolution prior to arriving at its current state. And while Newton's classical physics of a deterministic causal matrix remains highly practical for many purposes, its grounding machine metaphor hardly seems to fit our understanding of the developing universe, nor does it correspond with our deepest observations of it. The new cosmological picture is decidedly evolutionary. Understanding how the universe came to assume its current state is no longer a matter of explaining a timeless order, but a developmental story, within which the greatest climax of novelty and complexity is unmistakably the emergence of life and mind. Life and consciousness. Is there life beyond Earth? There are now believed to be 20 billion or so Earth-like planets in the Milky Way galaxy, places where the primordial conditions that were necessary for life on Earth may exist. Interestingly, there is evidence of single-celled life on Earth virtually as soon as the right conditions were present. It's not clear if this is a sign that life is common throughout the universe, but if that is the case, it's also true that single-celled life existed for an exceedingly long time, billions of years before the first multicellular organisms emerged. There's a very long and uncertain road between single-celled slimes and relatively intelligent life such as us. But of course, the universe is also a fantastically large place. Keep in mind that while our galaxy could contain these 20 billion Earth-like planets, it is just one galaxy among trillions. Nobody can truly grasp these numbers, but it seems implausible, though not impossible, that intelligent life is so fantastically rare that it only happened once. This seems out of keeping with the rest of what we know about cosmological phenomena. But whether or not conscious life has arisen billions of times, or just once, its presence on the cosmic stage is revealing of a reality capable of supporting its existence. Subtle enough, deep enough, to carry value, meaning, and significance. With consciousness comes the very possibility of significance itself. It is an extraordinary fact about reality that it supports the existence of consciousness. The mechanistic view, with its materialist philosophy, neither predicts nor has an explanation for consciousness. The possibility of subjective experience discloses a depth to reality that the outwardly viewing mechanistic paradigm cannot meaningfully articulate. By the latter decades of the 20th century, philosophical materialism had lost significant stock in both the science and philosophy of mind. The materialist view did not seem capable of incorporating the extraordinary fact that certain arrangements of matter are subjects of conscious experience. This became known as the hard problem of consciousness. The philosopher David Chalmers, who famously coined this term, offered a radical alternative to the ailing mechanistic materialist approach to explaining consciousness. Chalmers emphasized an assertion previously attributed to René Descartes 3 centuries earlier, that consciousness possesses an undeniable and immediate reality which cannot be doubted. Descartes' famous "I think, therefore I am" is today updated to "I have consciousness, therefore I exist." For Chalmers and a growing number of philosophers and scientists, the irreducible reality of consciousness must be preserved in any account of the universe that aspires to completeness. What is vitally missing from our understanding of brains, argues Chalmers, may also be missing from our basic description of the world. Discussion in this area often centers on the so-called intrinsic nature of reality, which has long been a mystery in science. We simply do not know, as the physicist Stephen Hawking once put it, what it is that breathes fire into the equations of physics and gives reality to the world. So what does this have to do with consciousness? In recent times, a constellation of philosophers have argued that the exclusively outward-facing description of the world provided by physics both implies and requires an interior landscape, an intrinsic ground to which the equations of physics point. Developing on ideas first put forward by Bertrand Russell and Arthur Eddington in the early 20th century, a new generation of philosophers and scientists argue that the intrinsic nature of matter may also be the essential nature of consciousness. As the philosopher Thomas Nagel has put it, quote, "We ourselves are large-scale, complex instances of something both objectively physical from outside and subjectively mental from inside. Perhaps the basis of this identity pervades the world." End quote. Far from there being no space for consciousness at the foundations of reality, for these thinkers, physics seems to require something very much like consciousness in order to be complete. Recent years have seen a new flowering of such thinking, which in the philosophical literature is known as panpsychism. But whether or not panpsychism is true, it is an example of an alternative frame on the same scientifically revealed universe. While the mechanistic materialist paradigm has been the default lens of science, it is now becoming recognised as containing underlying and often unexamined assumptions about reality, and other plausible metaphysical frames, including panpsychism, exist to be explored. One thing is certain: the universe is unmistakably a very different place due to its supporting the existence of consciousness. And while the last 300 years of empirical science has systematically factored out subjective experience, truly confronting the reality of consciousness unavoidably reframes our cosmological picture and should inform our considerations about the basic character of the universe.